My name is Robert Miller, and this is my story. I raised my son David with every ounce of strength I had. I worked long hours, missed countless meals, and sacrificed my own comfort to make sure he never lacked anything. From the moment his mother passed away, I promised myself that David would never feel the weight of loss or struggle. I wanted him to live a life better than mine, free from the hardships I had endured. As the years passed, I poured my savings, my time, and even my health into giving him opportunities. I bought him the best clothes, paid for his schooling, and made sure our home was a place he could proudly bring friends. I thought my love and sacrifices would be enough to build respect between us. But somewhere along the way, David stopped seeing me as his father and started treating me as if I was just another burden in his life. It began with small remarks, little sighs when I spoke too long, eye rolls when I asked questions, or irritation when I forgot something. At first, I told myself it was just stress, that young men often lose patience. But slowly, his tone hardened. He mocked me for being slow, for asking about his work, even for the medicine bottles on the kitchen counter. The boy I had raised with all my heart seemed to have forgotten the man who raised him. One evening, the disrespect became something I could never erase from memory. We were sitting at the dinner table. His wife, Emily, had cooked a meal. The children were laughing, and I quietly joined them, happy to be part of the family moment. I asked a simple question about the food, just a small comment, and David glared at me. He told me to stop talking, that I embarrassed him in front of his children. Before I could process those words, he lifted his glass and splashed water across my face. The table fell silent. My grandchildren froze. Emily looked down, ashamed, not daring to interfere. I sat there, water dripping from my chin, staring at my son. In that moment, everything I had given, every sacrifice I had made, felt shattered. He had not just disrespected me, he had humiliated me in front of the family I built. I wiped my face, not with anger, but with a calmness that surprised even me. That was the moment I knew something had to change. Before I continue this story, I want to ask you, if you've ever faced betrayal from your own blood, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened after that night changed my life forever. After that night at the dinner table, when David drenched me in humiliation with a single glass of water, I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't even defend myself. Instead, I sat there silently, finishing the meal as if nothing had happened. Outwardly, I looked like the broken old man he believed me to be. But inside, something had shifted. His action had burned away the last piece of hope I carried that he might one day rediscover respect. That night, I understood. My silence would no longer mean weakness. My silence would become my weapon. I went to my room after dinner, closing the door gently so no one noticed the storm brewing inside me. I sat on my bed, staring at the walls I had once painted with my own hands, walls that had sheltered David since childhood. This house, this family, this life, I had built all of it. And in one cruel moment, he had reminded me how disposable he thought I was. I whispered to myself, "Not anymore." For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking of protecting him. I was thinking of protecting myself, my dignity, and the legacy I had nearly handed away. The truth is, David didn't know the full extent of my sacrifices. Yes, he knew I had worked long hours, taken double shifts, and skipped my own meals to pay for his schooling. But he never understood the choices I made behind the scenes. He didn't know that the mortgage remained in my name, that the savings accounts were secured under my control, that the investments I'd quietly nurtured had never been fully transferred. He thought he was standing on his own 2 feet, but every piece of his comfort was built on foundations I still owned. And when he threw that water, mocking me in front of Emily and the children, he reminded me that those foundations could be pulled away as easily as they had been laid down. The next morning, I woke up early, long before anyone else. I brewed my coffee slowly, staring out the kitchen window as the sun began to rise. I watched the quiet street, the stillness of the world, and I made my decision. I would not yell. I would not confront. I would not stoop to the level of an angry man trying to reclaim respect with words. No, I would reclaim it with action, silent and final. I started small, careful not to raise suspicion. At the bank, I confirmed the accounts were still secure. The manager greeted me respectfully, reminding me that everything was still under my signature. That gave me reassurance. From that day, I began the process of taking back what was mine. I shifted funds carefully, piece by piece, never in amounts large enough to raise questions. Each transfer was like a thread pulled from the fabric of David's false kingdom. He thought the walls around him were solid, but they were already crumbling with every quiet signature I made. At home, I played the part of the quiet, aging father. I kept to myself, sat in my corner of the living room, and avoided any arguments. To David, my silence was proof of defeat. He mocked me more openly now, calling me old man under his breath, dismissing anything I said. Emily avoided eye contact with me, embarrassed by his behavior but too afraid to challenge him. My grandchildren were caught between love and confusion, sensing the tension but not understanding it. They would glance at me sometimes with pity, and I'd smile softly at them, reassuring them that I was fine. Inside, I was more than fine. I was preparing. Every night, when the house fell quiet, I pulled out a small notebook I kept hidden in my drawer. On its pages, I wrote down lists: bank accounts, property deeds, investment certificates, lawyers' contacts, and flight schedules. It was all meticulously planned. I researched destinations, places far away where no one would expect me to go. A coastal town in another country began to appear in my mind as the perfect escape. A place where the waves could wash away my past and no one would know the name Robert Miller. I even began practicing phrases in the language spoken there, just enough to buy food, rent an apartment, and live quietly without interference. But planning wasn't just about escape. It was about justice. My silence would teach David what no lecture could. I wanted him to wake up one morning and find not just that I was gone, but that everything he had taken for granted had vanished with me. The accounts, the house, the stability, all of it would slip through his fingers. He would learn painfully that arrogance has no foundation when respect is lost. During those weeks, I acted carefully, leaving no trace of my intentions. I continued my daily routines, eating meals in silence, folding my laundry, watering the small garden in the backyard. If anyone noticed, they would think I was simply drifting deeper into old age. But my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Every decision was deliberate, every move precise. I was building a puzzle that only I could see, and the final picture would leave my son standing on nothing. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room, David mocked me again. "Old man has nothing left to say," he laughed, turning to Emily as if expecting her to join him. She didn't laugh. She lowered her eyes, uncomfortable, while the children giggled nervously, but I smiled quietly to myself. He had no idea that within days he would be the one with nothing to say. His arrogance blinded him, and I let him believe it. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's preparation. I contacted my lawyer discreetly through email, arranging for a sealed letter to be written in advance. The letter would be simple, just a few sentences, but it would carry the weight of a lifetime. I instructed him to deliver it weeks after my disappearance, when the dust of confusion and panic had settled into despair. He agreed without hesitation, reminding me that everything I planned was legal and within my rights. That reassurance only strengthened my resolve. For once, the law would stand on my side, not against me. In the evenings, as the television droned in the other room and David laughed too loudly at shows he didn't really care about, I would retreat to my bedroom and quietly prepare. I organized my documents, folded the clothes I would carry, and set aside small amounts of cash withdrawn from different branches, so no single transaction would raise alarms. Each step made me feel lighter, as if the chains he had wrapped around me with his words and actions were falling away piece by piece. I thought, often about confrontation, about standing up at the dinner table one night and telling him exactly what I thought of his arrogance. But then I remembered the water dripping down my face, the laughter of my grandchildren freezing in the air, and the shame in Emily's eyes. Words would never erase that. Only absence could. Only silence would speak loud enough to echo forever in his memory. My leaving would not be a retreat. It would be a statement, one that no argument could diminish. As the day of departure drew closer, I noticed small details more sharply. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the way David's voice carried through the house, full of authority he hadn't earned. Each sound etched itself into my memory, reminders of the life I was about to leave behind. And instead of sadness, I felt calm. His house had been my prison, but soon it would be his cage. The night before I confirmed my booking, I barely slept. I lay in bed, listening to the muffled television laughter and the sound of Emily moving about in the kitchen. My heart was steady, not racing. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't nervous. I was free already in my mind. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamt of the sea, of waves crashing against rocks, of a horizon that stretched endlessly with no one to mock me, no one to belittle me. Just peace. The following morning, I rose before dawn, dressed quietly, and walked to the small desk where my packed suitcase rested. I touched its handle, feeling the weight of my decision. I whispered to myself, "This is for me. This is for the respect I deserve." Then I straightened my back, lifted the case, and prepared for the final steps that would erase me from David's world. And so, with silence as my ally and dignity as my compass, I prepared to vanish, not in anger, not in violence, but in calm, deliberate justice. My son would soon wake to discover that the foundation he mocked had always been the one holding him up. And when it was gone, he would finally understand that respect is not a favor. It is the very ground on which families stand. The morning of my disappearance arrived quietly, just as I had planned. Dawn had barely touched the sky when I slipped out of bed and placed my suitcase by the door. I paused for a moment in the hallway, looking back at the house I had built with my own hands. Every corner carried memories. David's first steps, the nights I stayed awake tending his fevers, the echoes of laughter that once filled these walls. But those memories had been stained by his arrogance. Now they felt more like chains than treasures. I exhaled slowly, reminding myself that leaving was not abandonment. It was justice. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dew. The street was silent, the world still asleep. I walked down the steps with steady movements, each step lighter than the last. For years I had been mocked, belittled, treated as though my existence were a burden. That morning, for the first time in decades, I felt the freedom of choice. I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking toward dignity. A taxi rolled up, its headlights cutting through the pale dawn. The driver greeted me casually, unaware that he was carrying me away from a lifetime of humiliation. At the airport, I moved through the motions calmly. I checked my bag, presented my passport, and waited at the gate surrounded by families heading to vacations, businessmen rushing to meetings, and students off to adventures. None of them knew the truth, that I was a man erasing himself from the story his son thought he controlled. As the plane taxied down the runway, I stared out the window. When the wheels lifted off the ground, I felt the final chain break. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let the silence fill me. Robert Miller, the man mocked at the dinner table, no longer existed. What remained was someone reborn in dignity. Back home, the morning unfolded like any other for David. He woke up late, stretched lazily, and walked into the kitchen with Emily by his side. He spoke with the same arrogance, boasting about bills he would pay and plans he had for the weekend. He reached for his wallet, confident as always, and swiped his card to cover a utility bill. Declined. He frowned, tried again, and again. Error messages filled the screen. He laughed awkwardly, brushing it off as a temporary glitch. But when Emily pressed him for answers, his smile faltered. He grabbed another card, declined again. His hands began to tremble. The children watched quietly as their father's face turned pale. Emily's concern shifted to suspicion, her eyes narrowing. David called the bank in a rush, demanding explanations. After a long pause, the officer on the other end confirmed what I had arranged weeks earlier. All accounts were under Robert Miller's name. David's rights had been revoked. His access had been permanently removed. Every safety net he thought was his had vanished overnight. David's voice cracked as he argued, his arrogance breaking under the weight of reality. But no amount of shouting could change the truth. He had nothing. Panic swept over him. He called again, hoping for a different answer, but each time the reply was the same. He slammed the phone onto the counter, his chest heaving, his pride unraveling. Emily demanded to know what was happening. He muttered excuses, but she could see through his lies. Her silence cut deeper than any question. The man who once strutted with authority now looked powerless, cornered by consequences he never imagined. When David stormed into my room to confront me, he found only emptiness. The bed was neatly made, the shelves bare, my suitcase gone. The silence in that room was louder than any words I could have spoken. He called my phone relentlessly, but I had already discarded the SIM card. His messages shifted from anger to panic to begging. First, "What have you done?" Then, "You can't do this to me." Later, "Please, Dad, let's talk." None of those words reached me. My silence was my answer. Days turned into weeks, and David's world collapsed piece by piece. Friends stopped returning his calls once they realized he couldn't repay his debts. Bills piled higher, notices arriving with threats he couldn't ignore. Emily's patience frayed, her voice sharp with accusations. The children sensed the tension. Their once proud father reduced to pacing hallways, muttering under his breath, hands shaking. The man who had mocked me for needing help with simple tasks now struggled to keep his own household from crumbling. His pride had fed his arrogance, but pride couldn't feed his family. In his desperation, he went to the bank in person. He demanded to speak with the manager, to prove his identity, to reclaim what he thought was his. But the documents I had signed were final. Legally, he was nothing. The manager's polite but firm words left him stunned. As he walked out of the bank, shoulders hunched, he looked like a ghost of the man who once towered over me with disdain. At home, Emily grew colder. She asked hard questions. "Why didn't you tell me everything was in your father's name? Why did you let me believe we were secure?" David had no answers. His silence only confirmed the truth. The arguments grew louder each night, their walls echoing with blame and regret. The neighbors whispered, shaking their heads at the fall of a man who once flaunted wealth and mocked the very father who made it possible. And then, when the chaos was at its peak, the final blow arrived. One quiet afternoon, as David sat surrounded by unpaid bills, his wife furious and his children silent, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find my lawyer standing there with a sealed envelope. "From your father," the lawyer said simply. David's hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was a single note, written in my handwriting. "You threw water on my face. I drained the life you thought was yours." That was all. No signature, no return address, nothing more. Just finality. Emily read it over his shoulder, her face hardening as she walked away in silence. The children glanced at their father, confused and afraid, while David stood frozen, staring at the paper as if it had burned through his skin. His voice cracked, whispering the words again and again, disbelief melting into sorrow. He tried to call the lawyer back, demanding to know where I was, but the response was the same. "Your father made his decision. That is all you need to know." In that moment, David finally understood. Respect is not inherited, not guaranteed. Once lost, it cannot be bought back. He realized the foundation of his life, his comfort, his security, his pride, had always been me. And when I removed myself, everything he built collapsed into dust. As for me, I began my new life in a quiet coastal town overseas. I rented a modest apartment near the sea, where no one knew my name, no one whispered about my past, and no one mocked me. In the mornings, I walked along the shoreline, the waves washing over my feet, each step reminding me that I was free. In the afternoons, I sat at a cafe with a newspaper, sipping coffee slowly, savoring the peace I had long been denied. At night, I cooked simple meals, enjoying every bite without judgment. Sometimes I thought of David, of his downfall, of the letter he must have read over and over, but those thoughts didn't bring pain. They brought clarity. He had chosen arrogance over respect, cruelty over gratitude, and I had chosen silence over confrontation. In the end, silence spoke louder than any words. My justice was not about watching him suffer. It was about knowing that he would remember the sound of that water splashing across my face every time he opened an empty wallet, every time Emily's silence cut him, every time his children looked at him with confusion instead of admiration. My justice was the knowledge that he could never erase the truth, that the man he mocked as powerless was the very man who had held his entire world together, walked along the shore one evening as the sun set, painting the horizon in gold and crimson. The waves crashed gently, the air salty and clean. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Respect could not be demanded from David, but I had given it back to myself. He had thrown water to erase my dignity. I had washed away his future with a pen, and that was enough.